Good afternoon. We're just going to let everyone in from the waiting room. This is our final session of the sessions with Alden Solovy about the soul of Shabbat. There are some things that are very difficult and some things that are very easy, and talking to people about prayer is something that is very difficult, and Alden just does it in a way that makes the path to prayer certainly not easy, but easier. He smooths out the path. He must little Derek. He paves the way for us. And so it's been a pleasure to have him for 4 weeks with us. This is the final week, and then we'll take a bit of a break and pick up again in January. At about 12:30, Susan Stallone will come on. I'll be on listening still, but I have to travel to speak somewhere at 1. So I'll put off my camera in a little bit and still be listening, but Susan Stallone will be moderating. Also, thanks to Ron, our producer. So Alden, I'm going to hand things over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for those kind words, and thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you who've hung in from week to week. You know, I was going to save this toward the end as a bit of a bonus, but I thought I'll start with this instead, because this Friday will be Shabbat Chanukah. So we have the overlap of Chanukah and Shabbat. So let me say Chanukah Sameach, Chagurim Sameach to all of you. But we have the overlap of Shabbat and Chanukah. It just so happens that it's also Rosh Chodesh. So we have a lot going on this particular Shabbat, in which we'll, say the Al Hanisim prayer, which is added throughout the 8 days of Hanukkah during the Tefillah. We'll say Hallel for Rosh Chodesh, and it will be Shabbat and Hanukkah. So there's a really very special link between Shabbat and Hanukkah that I want to point out, and it's of course, it's a liturgical link in Kabbalat Shabbat. So as we talked about earlier, Kabbalat Shabbat begins with 6 Psalms and then goes to Lecha Dodi, which is the main topic of our evening. Psalm 97 ends with this line: Or zarua la tzadik u'yishrei lev simcha simchu tzadikim b'Adonai v'hodu l'zeker kadsho. This is on page 132 of Mishkan Tefillah. Light is sown for the righteous, radiant for the upright. Some translations for the upright in heart. O you righteous, rejoice in Adonai and acclaim God's holy name. So what is this Or zarua la tzadik, light is sown for the righteous? There is a rabbinic midrash about the shift in language between the first 3 days of creation and what happens on the 4th day of creation. So God creates light on the first day, and on the 4th day, God creates the great lights that will guide the day and the night, the sun, the moon, the stars. And the word shifts from or to me'or, which can be broken down to from light. So the sun, the moon, the stars, the light isn't the light God created on that first day, but it's light from that light. So what happened to that light that God created on the first day? Well, it went into a geniza, into a storage space. It's called Or Haganuz, the hidden light. And this line, Or Zarua la Tzadik, alludes to the Or Haganuz, the hidden light, which will become revealed for the righteous at a later time. This line also, or Zaru Alat Sadiq, is the first line of Kol Nidre. It's the first thing that's said. This resonance to the potential of this very, very special light. So whatever does this have to do with Hanukkah? The rabbis say that the Hanukkah lights actually contain a fragment of the light from the Or HaGanuz. That the Hanukkah lights contain just a hint of that very, very special light that God created on the first day of creation. And this is why the Hanukkah candles have become so special and so important to the Jewish people. So we have this connection between our Shabbat liturgy, the Psalms, and Yom Kippur and Chanukah through the hidden light which can become revealed to us. I'm just going to pause there and ask, since we've asked folks to check in before, any special connection for you with lighting Shabbat candles and Hanukkah candles? We do that. So this Friday night will be the only time we do that together. Some years, maybe we get twice, depending on how Hanukkah falls. But this year we'll light Shabbat candles and Hanukkah candles at the same time. Anyone with any thoughts or stories or memories there, or we'll just move on.
Do you have a feeling about oil versus candles and all that? Like in Jerusalem or Israel, do you think like people use oil more commonly than candles, or is it a mix?
People, I mean, in the stores you see it all for sale: candles, oil. Certainly in the more from Dati neighborhoods, it's going to be oil, because that's the substance that was used on that, on that fateful rededication of the temple, 8 days of oil burning. I use candles myself, because that was my family tradition. That's what I was raised with. But you'll walk out in certain neighborhoods, and the Chanukiah, we don't call it a menorah here. Menorah is the 7-stemmed candelabra that was in the temple. Chanukiah is the specific Hanukkah menorah. You can go out into certain neighborhoods and people put their Chanukiot right out on the wall in front of their house, or actually there's a frame built into their home where they can put their Chanukiah. Some years I'll actually go on a Chanukiah safari, photo safari, and I'll go either into the Nachlaot neighborhood or into the old city or toward Mea Sharim, because it's just gorgeous, the different Chanukiot. But I would say there is a bias and a leaning toward oil here.
Hi, I have a question. It's a little bit off topic, and it's from a United States perspective. But I just remember once upon a time, people would have their Chanukiah in the window. And my sense is maybe it was Chabad that brought menorahs to the public space. But I just saw the news yesterday, the biggest menorah in the world was in Central Park. There's menorahs all over the place. I don't think it used to be like that. I think it was much more of a private thing. And I don't know if it has to do with the time of year and competing with Christmas, but in the United States, every public square will have a Christmas tree and menorah. I don't think it was always like that. And I'm just wondering what the sense is. I know around the world, Chabad is in every city, in Berlin, in Moscow, and it just wasn't so public as it seems to be now. And I'm wondering about your sense about that.
Yeah, I think that might have been part of the way some of us grew up, in suburbs and in neighborhoods, and it was a family gathering. The mitzvah is for some to make famous the miracle. So putting the Chanukiah in the window, for example, many families did that. I think, here in Jerusalem, every neighborhood has a Chabad, and every neighborhood Chabad has a Chanukiah in public, a large public one. I think your sense of the U.S. makes, I've been gone 10 years, but putting them in the public square was not something that communities necessarily advocated 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And it's very consistent with the theme of the holiday and the mitzvah of the holiday, which was to make famous the miracle of the oil. So thanks for that question, Steve. Other thoughts or comments? Just this link between Chanukah, the light, the Chanukiah, and the light we think about on Shabbat, and the light of creation is just too beautiful to miss, since we are talking about Shabbat, and this Friday night will be that one Friday night where that takes place. Any other thoughts or comments before
I have one other question, again, from your perspective, being in Israel. You can't walk into a store or a public space without hearing, at least in the United States, Christmas music of all kinds, in restaurants and this. And aside from Adam Sandler and the Hanukkah song, there isn't any sort of like mainstream kind of song. But I'm just wondering, in Israel, like, is there Hanukkah music all over the place as there is Christmas music all over the place in the United States? Is it a different kind of sensibility, or is that more of a United States kind of thing?
It's a different kind of sensibility. There isn't a lot of music in the public sphere anyway, unless someone is out on the street playing, or you're going somewhere out. I mean, the advertisements, for example, on the billboards will make seasonal puns about the holidays. Like Nescafe talks about Nes Gadol, the big miracle, but the big coffee. So, you'll see on the buses, it'll say Chag Sameach or Chanukah Sameach. So there is a recognition in the public sphere, but music isn't just like one of those things that's as ubiquitous here as there. I mean, I went downtown today to my clinic to get my flu shot, and some busker on the street was playing Hanukkah music, and it was the first Hanukkah music in public I heard. That said, for the last easily 2 weeks, everything in synagogues that they could fit to a Hanukkah song has been fit to a Hanukkah song. So Lecha Dodi to Ma'u Tzur, and on to Al Anisim, and to other songs as well. So in that sense, there's a very, very dramatic shift in music, in the religious space.
Along those final question, I don't mind. I don't want to take you off topic or anything, but what's your sensibility? Again, I'm giving you a United States perspective, but I happen to live in Miami, in Florida, and this was a governmental kind of organization, and they were saying, "Come get your Christmas trees and your Hanukkah bushes." And I'm just wondering about the Christmatization of Hanukkah, or the comparability and all the mixed kind of things like that. I get there's blended families that celebrate both traditions, but I'm just wondering where you have like blue and white stockings and all of that, and just that sort of like one into the other. And just,
can I comment on it? Or when you're done, Alden, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's a really interesting reality that plays out where Israelis don't have their Judaism threatened in the way American Jews do. So I remember years ago, there was an exhibit curated by the Israel Museum that was of like the nails that nailed Jesus to the cross. It was all Christian and connecting Israel and Christianity. And it was curated by Israeli because there's no fear of there not being Jewish. While in America, you know, there's such a reality. I mean, think of your own families. You know, I certainly look at mine. Like I was just talking about this relative, like whose grandchildren will be Jewish, you know, because of the dominant culture, because we're allowed to marry anyone we want. And so there's in Israel, just not a, like, I don't know, like if there's, you know, Hanukkah bush means anything or not, but like, it's not an issue because they're going to be Jewish most likely in the next generation. For American Jews, like I've come to the point where I'd rather have an acknowledged Hanukkah than no Hanukkah at all. But for Israelis, it's such a different reality because there's no threat. For American Jews, it all depends on the spin. And like, you know, we're in a place where Jews can marry anyone. And, you know, if we want them to choose to have Jewish children and raise Jewish kids, we have to kind of figure out like what are our red lines outside of which it's not Jewish. In Israel, it's just not. I don't know if there's Hanukkah bushes in Israel, and Alden can talk to that, but I think there's subtlety that an Israeli has an assurance there will be Judaism in the future the way an American Jew doesn't about their children and grandchildren.
So building on that, there is no connection between various outer manifestations and those manifestations as not Jewish or as Christian. For example, Christmas bulbs hung in Sukkot as decorations. You know, and I look at it and I see, wow, those are Christmas colors and they're shaped the way, and the Israelis are just clueless. And, you know, a Santa Claus costume for Purim. And they're just not aware of that cultural connection because it's not in the culture here. So there's a much different energy to it. And you know, like I said, every neighborhood in Jerusalem has a Chabad. Every Chabad puts out their own menorah. If I want to go see a Christmas tree, I'm going to go into the old city and go into the Christian quarter. Or you know, I would have to go to a Christian Arab community. So I'm just not going to see that here. Anyway, great questions, all spurred by this connection between Orza Ruah from our Shabbat liturgy and the Chanukiah. So let's pivot back to our Soul of Shabbat conversation, and I just want to quickly remind you we got partway through this exploration of the liturgy, and I'm going to jump back to a slide that we had up before, just as a reminder. The principles of Shabbat: menucha, joy, rest, joy, oneg, community, sacred time, taste of a world to come, me'en olam haba, and this idea that we were driving toward, which is Shabbat as a wedding of cosmic significance. We talked about Kabbalat Shabbat as the idea of receiving Shabbat, how we bring Shabbat in, how we welcome Shabbat, how Shabbat shows up for us. The early rabbis envisioning this as a wedding, and the Kabbalists beginning to enact it with their own behavior. So we looked at this basis of Kabbalat Shabbat, which comes from the Talmud, and this line Boi Kala, which comes from the Talmud, and we began to look at this idea of Kabbalat Shabbat as a wedding of cosmic significance. So Lecha Dodi is the culmination of that idea. Did we? I'm trying to remember if we talked about this idea of the last time of the preparations for Shabbat. That we actually begin thinking about Shabbat maybe the day before. What buying the food we might cook, cooking a wonderful meal, getting the house clean, setting the table beautifully, lighting candles in the home, which is where that originally took place. When you think about the arc of those behaviors, it's as if we're preparing for a wedding. Let's say it's as if we're preparing for a important feast. Let's take it that far. We have a beautiful table. We have special foods. We have a candelabra, if you will, on the table. And then we get to this idea of Lecha Dodi. So Lecha Dodi was written by Shlomo Alevi Alkabetz. He emigrated to Sfat in 1535, and his disciples and study partners are a who's who, and really a generation of theological and liturgical innovators. Moshe Cordovero, Yosef Karo, who was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Isaac Luria Ha'ari, who was the father of Lurianic Kabbalah, the author of the song, the Piyut, the prayer poem, Yedid Nefesh, Elazar Azakiri, the author of Yaribon, Yisrael Najara, just a who's who of liturgical and spiritual innovators. And Alkabetz may have been one of the greatest. This poem quotes Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Samuel, Isaiah, Proverbs, Judges, Song of Songs. It's an amazing use of biblical imagery, tied together thematically, and he went so far as to sign it by each of the stanzas being an acrostic, and each of the stanzas holding a letter of his name. Why isn't it moving? Okay, so let's look at the first verse. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor achad hishmiyanu elam yuchad Adonai echad u'shmo achad l'shem multiferet v'litila. Keep and remember. Remember we talked about this early on. We talked about how one version of the Ten Commandments had the word Shamor and one Zachor, Exodus and Deuteronomy. And here the poet is saying Shamor and Zachor were said in one word, were a single command given by God. But here's the Kabbalistic twist. Zachor, according to Kabbalists, represents Zachar. If you see the letters are pretty much the same, with the exception of the interjection of the vav. You see that trying to use the pen here. Zachar, we have the same three letters. So from a Kabbalistic point of view, Zachor represents the masculine principle, Yesod, foundation. Shamor, which starts with a shin, and Shekhinah. Shamor represents Shekhinah, the female attributes, also called Malkut or sovereignty. So on Shabbat, these two are united. Shamor v'zachor come together, the masculine principle and the feminine principle come together, and the result is the offspring of redemption and holiness. The result is, as we talked about, the neshama yetera, the special soul, being enlivened and being enabled for each of us. Here is the final verse. And did I skip the refrain? Well, I'll go back to it. Boi bashalom ateret bala, and you'll see that in Proverbs, Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor. This is the reference ateret bala here from Proverbs. Enter in peace, O crown of your husband, enter in gladness, and so on. So we're having this allusion to the ideal feminine. This I believe I skipped the refrain. So here we have L'chadodi likrad kala panei Shabbat nekabla, and it comes from Song of Songs. So again, we've got this poetic connection, this love song connection to the Kabbalat Shabbat liturgy. So let's go back to the final verse. Boi b'shalom ateret bala. What's the choreography here? When we get to this verse, Boi v'shalom ateret bala, what happens? In at least, I don't know if you do this in your congregation, in traditional congregations, what happens just before Boi v'shalom?
Stand.
We all stand up, thank you. And then we get to the end, Boi kala, what happens?
Bow.
We bow. So here's my question. When a bride enters a room, what do? We stand. We are actually in the flow of creating the metaphor with our own selves, creating the metaphor of a wedding. So we start during the day with this, creating beautiful food, cleaning the house, creating a beautiful table, lighting a candelabra. We go to services, and Kabbalat Shabbat is this reenactment of the arrival of the bride that is Shabbat, and in this union of masculine, the masculine principle and the feminine principle, the peace and joy are the children, and the neshama yetera arrives. It isn't actually until the Ma'ariv service, when we say Vayechulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzva'am, that's then the wedding vows. So we've had, in a sense, the engagement and the processional, and then we actually have the wedding vows. What happens then? We go home traditionally, and we have a wedding feast, or we have a feast. So the whole build up to Shabbat is about this love dynamic between the masculine principle, the feminine principle. But now we have to ask the question, because we've anthropomorphized God, which none of us are all too keen with. Did I go too far? Okay. So this is the Zohar saying that what happens when the bride arrives, that the queen is crowned by the holiness of the people, and all of them are crowned with new souls, crowned with the neshama yetera. But this idea of who's who tends to trouble folks. So here's one answer. It's from Isaiah. For your maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is God's name, and your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, is called the God of earth. In other words, God is the husband and the people of Israel are the bride. So we're the bride. But there are actually a variety of answers here, which are fascinating. So the Zohar, as we talked about, has Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of divine majesty, Shamor, in you becoming in union with Melech, the masculine principle, divine majesty, Zachor. So the bride is God, and the groom, in fact, is God. And this is a union of bride and groom, a unification of God's self. The Maharasha from Poland in the 16th century says, now the bride is actually Shabbat and Israel is the groom. The Maharal of Prague says Israel is the bride and God is the groom. And in Leviticus Rabbah, which is Midrash, Shabbat is the bride and God is the groom. So what we end up creating is, rather than sort of a simple, flat, anthropomorphized metaphor of God, what we've actually created is a rich palette of potential relationships that in fact most likely are all true. That part of Shabbat is, God's rest, God's unification of God, God's aspects coming to rest with each other, which would be Zohar. Part of it would be Shabbat in Israel, this feeling we have that we've talked about in several sessions, that when Shabbat shows up, we, as the people of Israel, feel connected in a much different way to the day and to each other. And again, Shabbat and God, Israel and God. What this slide shows also is that for the mystics, everything that happens in the divine realm is echoed in the human realm. So while in the divine realm, there's this marriage of cosmic proportions, at the human realm, this is also about bride and groom, partner and partner, human and human, in love with one another, becoming connected and committing themselves to one another. So in this myth of the sacred marriage, we have all kinds of answers. I love the richness of the metaphor. It's not nearly as flat as the idea of simply a bride and a groom, which could also be king and groom, queen and bride. These things being interchangeable metaphors for a wedding in the Zohar. So what happens? The mystics envisioned Shekhinah, the divine feminine, residing in the West and facing to the West. And the divine masculine resides in the east and faces east. And on Shabbat, what happens is the divine feminine turns to face the east and moves in the direction of east, and the divine masculine turns to face the west and moves in the direction of west, and they meet each other. But this notion of turning to see one another, and this is why the idea was to go out, to walk out into the fields, to walk in the direction of the west in order to greet the Sabbath bride. When they're back to back, they cannot be in relationship. But once a week, the divine feminine turns to face the east, and the divine masculine turns to face the west, and they can be in union. I'm going to stop because that was quite a bit, and just check in to see if there are any thoughts, questions, comments, pushback. Okay. So this idea of light. So that's where I'm going to end with Lecha Dodi. So and this metaphor of the divine marriage. So any thoughts, comments before I move on to another metaphor, the one we started out with, which was light. Tov, the center. So let's talk about lighting Shabbat candles for just a second. So the act of lighting candles is the first mitzvah to usher in Shabbat and Yom Tov, and therefore carries with it great merit and blessing, bringing down light from the heavenly spheres. This is Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. This resonates with the idea that we talked about at the beginning of the Or Zarua, of the hidden light being accessible, being something we yearn for. On Shabbat. This is Elliot Dorff, a contemporary theologian, commenting that Shabbat lights have theological consequences, that the sun will set every Friday evening, whether or not we light candles. A commandment to light candles implies that God alone cannot bring the Shabbat, but we can't either. We can say, any day of the week, but it's not going to be Shabbat. Only when we say that Friday night will it be Shabbat. On the other hand, it might not be Shabbat until we make that blessing in the proper moment at the proper time. What Dorff is talking about here is the idea that Shabbat is a partnership. Now, remember that our Havdalah candle, as I believe we talked about, is the result of our fire myth, that Adam was the first human came into being on the sixth day, and then it was Shabbat. Shabbat was a day, 36 hours of only light, and as that day Shabbat was ending, was the first time Adam was experienced darkness, and Adam was frightened. Adam thought the world was coming to an end, and so God gives Adam, this is Midrash, this is not in Torah, God gives Adam fire in the form of a Havdalah candle, so to light his way, so that Adam will not fear the imminent destruction of the world, and so we bookend Shabbat with light. We bookend it with the Shabbat candles, two separate candles. Some would say that represents Shamor and Zachor again, and then on for Havdalah a braided candle. Any memories that anyone wants to share of lighting Shabbat candles or Havdalah candles or such moments? I know I love hearing your personal stories. Now, I used to light 4 candles, 2 for me and for Shabbat, and 1 for each of my daughters. Then I got a little goofy romantic, and I started to light 6 candles. Those the extra 2 were to sort of hold the place. I'm a widower, single. So the 2 were to sort of hold the place for a woman who would come into my life, and then light candles. And I thought that's so I did that for a couple of years, and I thought that's goofy. So I went back to the 4. So I light 4 these days. I don't know if anyone has a different tradition of how many candles they light. 2, David. Okay, great. That's traditional. Here I'll go to someone's home and they have like 6 kids, and you'll see like this whole blazing thing of light. And it does harken back to that idea of a candelabra, of the wedding feast and the light being that metaphor. So clearly in my my slides, I jumped the gun, but I actually wanted Rabbi present for the conversation about.
I'm still listening. I'm just in the car, but I'm still listening.
I know that. I just wanted you, in the room, in the house, if you will, for the conversation on Or Zarua. 2. Oh, I have, David, I think I have similar candlesticks. Let me see. Let's see that. I have to stop sharing. With the Magen David in the middle. Yeah, I have similar candlesticks.
Yes, they're from Hillel.
From Hillel?
Yes, Hillel put these out.
Nice, beautiful. And those are the ones you use each week?
Yes.
Nice.
So,
Thanks for sharing.
Excuse me. I attached a link in the chat. There was an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about how younger people are celebrating Shabbat on Thursday. And it says you don't have to celebrate Shabbat on Shabbat. And they're more about the spirit. So I just thought it was a very interesting kind of article, even in terms of the food that was being served, non-Jewish people coming and like the tradition. So it just seems that, again, I suppose people can do anything, but they're sort of picking and choosing sort of the peripheral kinds of things and getting away from the actual Jewishness of Shabbat, which I thought was fascinating. They'll have the meal, they'll do that, but the table that they're setting had a Yortzeit candle on it because they thought that was a symbol. So people buy into the concept sometimes, but not the actual meaning of Shabbat as well, which I thought that was just a fascinating article about how things can how some people think that they're celebrating Shabbat. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up in terms of what traditional Shabbat is.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of, I haven't read the article, so it's probably pretty dangerous to comment. That said, I think there are, a lot of failures of Jewish education. And one is, just not teaching the actual joy of each of the, we sort of do an intellectual thing without teaching the joy of the festivals and the joy of Shabbat and sort of the young people really can, and I think would resonate with the type of conversation that we are having about Shabbat. But beyond that, I would have to read the article to say anything. It's kind of like having a lovely family meal with matzah 2 weeks after Passover and calling it a Seder. It might not be a Seder. So another way to think about light is in Breshit Rabbah. And here we're going way back to the conversation we had about Vayechulu Hashemayim v'aretz v'chol tzva'am v'olim b'yom hashvi'i v'lotu asher asam v'yvarach leim et yom hashvi'i v'kadesh oto kivo Shabbat mikol malachto asher b'arei. So we're talking about what this notion that God both blessed the Shabbat and sanctified it. Well, what does it mean that it was both blessed and sanctified? And Breshit Rabbah is actually saying that the blessing and the sanctification is the same. It's the light that flows from the face of human, the light that flows from us. And it goes on to say that the light of our faces throughout the week isn't comparable to one's face on Shabbat. So, it might be fun to pay attention at services on Shabbat to see, whose eyes are twinkling and whose face is shining. And let's go to another metaphor. Et ha'or, the light, has a numerical equivalent in that's gematria. So gematria is the application of the numerical values of letters to make connections between words. So the gematria et ha'or, the light that was created on the first day, has the numerical equivalent of Bat Torah in the Torah, both adding up to 613. So the Baal Turim is saying that Torah ultimately is the light that we are looking for. So we have a lot of metaphors for light, one being the human face, one being Torah, one being Shabbat itself. Okay. So there is another piece of liturgy that would, I'd be remiss if we didn't look at it for just a bit. Shalom Aleichem. Lots of melodies to Shalom Aleichem. I think this was one of the songs that someone mentioned early on during our first session, actually, when we talked about the music that resonates for us. So Shalom Aleichem is based on this idea that two angels follow us home from services on Friday night, and when they arrive, if our home is set up for Shabbat, the good angel blesses us that next Shabbat it will be the same, and if the house isn't prepared for Shabbat, the bad angel blesses us that should be how it is the following week. But I love this particular interpretation that actually Shalom Aleichem is about shlimut. It's about wholeness. It's about the completeness that we're looking for in our own lives, that we truly should feel as if we lack nothing, that the world is complete on Shabbat, and perhaps we can hang on to the fact that our weekday work is done, and now on Shabbat, I'm no longer split between what I want for myself and my family and the demands of an outside life. The Shalom Aleichem is awkward in a certain kind of way, because if you remember the verses, the first verse is Shalom Aleichem. It's just peace be with you. Then Boachem l'Shalom, come on in, angels, you angels of peace. Barchuni l'Shalom, bless me with peace. And then Seifchem l'Shalom. It's like, okay, come, hello, bless me, see you later, get out of here. It's because that last verse comes, and in fact, there are a couple of Sephardi traditions that have actually modified Shalom Aleichem because of that rapidity of that sort of instant bless me and now you're leaving, and that is the addition of just a couple of words in the second, third, and fourth stanzas, which are bless me with peace. So bless me with peace, you angel of peace. Bless me with peace, you angels of peace. So it's welcome, bless me, bless me, bless me. Go out in peace, bless me with peace. So it changes the rhythm just a little bit. There's another tradition of adding a fifth verse, which is linger in peace. In other words, stay a while before sending the angels out back into the world. So anyone care to add anything about your personal relationship with Shalom Aleichem? The song, the melody. Okay. Well, there's, of course, one more thing we have to do. We would never be done if we did it all, but there's just one more bit that I'd like to share, and I think this is, sort of crowns some of the conversations that we talked about. And this is the idea that Shabbat is peace. So the Zohar says God's name is Shalom. Shabbat is called Shalom because they are the Shalom of the above, God being the Shalom of the above, and Shabbat being the Shalom of the below, so that we can continue to experience in relationship with Shabbat God's peace and that harmony that is Shabbat. Well, it has been a profound pleasure to be with you. I would love to close with a poem, but you know me, I can't resist just checking in to see if there are any other comments or questions that folks feel that they have. Susan.
I have a comment. It's from back when you were talking about, somebody brought up about Shabbat being on Thursday and talking about tradition. And it kind of reminds me of, well, it's so interesting to me that some of the younger generation, they're trying to hold on to the tradition of Shabbat in their own way, in the way that works for them. And I don't know why Thursday is better than Friday, but I guess if it is, and I'm just kind of wondering out loud if that's a good thing, if it's better to hold on to the tradition, even if it's not in the exact right way. And it reminded me of the idea that, I don't know if you've been to a wedding lately, a non-Jewish wedding, but everybody's doing the hora, like everybody. You don't have to be Jewish to do the hora at a wedding, because I think kids have gone to Jewish weddings and they're like, wow, that's awesome. Everybody dances around and they raise the bride and groom in the chair. And so I was just wondering about anybody's thoughts on that before you close.
Well, I'll jump in with a traditionalist's point of view. And I am a liberal Jew. But I will say that if it's Thursday or maybe Sunday or sometimes Monday, then it really isn't any day. So there's a huge, sort of risk. Every gain has a loss. So the gain that people are trying to embrace the customs of Shabbat, the loss is actually the celebration of Shabbat on Shabbat. The loss is, we say, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav. Mitzvah is a good deed. Mitzvah, siva, is commandment. So what's my relationship with God if I get to change the day that God picked for us to have Shabbat? So I would say, it's, if we were talking indigenous people, we might be talking about cultural expropriation. You're taking our Shabbat and you're doing it in a way it's not intended on a different day and adding other customs. At what point does it stop being Jewish? At what point does it stop being Shabbat? I think those are really serious questions. So I would say, pool boots if you want to, have a matzo ball on Thursday night. But that ain't Shabbat. That would be me. I said in an earlier session, how do we know what day is Shabbat? How do we know? We know when Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Pesach and Shavuot, we know that by the sun, the moon, and the stars. They're the Moadim. But how do we know when it's Shabbat? It just comes every 7 days. There's nothing to connect us to that particular day. How we knew it was Shabbat was the day God gave us manna and said, you'll collect it 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, 5 day, 6 day, you'll collect 2 portions, and the 7th day will be Shabbat, and you won't collect every portion. And since the desert, every 7 days since manna was given, it has been Shabbat. Now, Thursday ain't gonna cut it for me. It just isn't. Margaret, you have a hand up.
Oh, well, I agree with you. But it just made me laugh when you brought up the matzo ball soup, because just today, this morning, my oldest grandson, who's on vacation, is going to be somewhere. He's going to some deli and he's going to have some matzo ball soup. And I said, well, we have, we're having soup on Friday. He says, yes, but I can have matzo ball soup anytime. But, the idea for me is it's special. That's when we have it. But of course, there's always leftovers. But I'm not worried about this young man. But it was just, to me, there's only some things that I do. It's like having the challah. It's for Shabbos. It's not to have it every day of the week.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. By the way, if anybody checks the chat, that link is in there to the New York Times article, and you can read all about it. The comments are more interesting than the article. But I do want to say one other thing about food, because on every college campus, whether it's a Hillel or Chabad, the way they bring the students in is by food. There'll be the Friday night, Shabbat dinner, every holiday. They're not going to get in there for the learning, but once they have them in there, the food is their ticket in. And I think that's a fascinating kind of thing. But as far as challah that you mentioned, almost every restaurant will have challah French toast, right? And or bagels have become, so Jewish food has penetrated, which is kind of interesting. But I think somebody else, Susan, I think mentioned about Jewish traditions being picked up. If you go on YouTube, you'll see a lot of that where Jewish music does make its way into non-Jewish weddings, which is kind of fascinating. But I think in a way it's good. But I think food is the key. And again, then you get into the all different things about, Jewish deli versus kosher deli and all that kind of thing. But that's a whole other kind of area as well, where some are much more strict. And some people you say Jewish deli, oh, that's kosher, and then you'll have, pastrami and Swiss cheese. So you get into like those kinds of things as well, in terms of like what traditions your family, upholds. So is to be kosher matzo ball soup or just matzo ball soup? It's just a very interesting thing, depending on where you're coming from on that Jewish spectrum.
Thanks, Steve. I do think we need to make a distinction between cultural behaviors and Jewish. I will say, I'll be so bold as to say, Torah commandments, and it's fine to have challah any day of the week. But when I put 2 loaves of challah under a hand-stitched crocheted challah cover, and I put a special knife by it, and I wash my hands before, and I'm quiet between the time I wash my hands and I say the challah, it's not the same thing. It was a piece of bread that was made into challah French toast at the deli on Thursday. But on Friday evening, it's Shabbat challah. It might be cooked the same way. It might look the same, but it's a completely different substance. And for the people who get that, they'll get that. And the people who don't get that won't get that. That's just how it is in my view of the world. So let me close with a poem called Sowing Light. It's based on Or Zarua. I know we're over a couple of minutes. Sowing light from this grateful heart. Light is sown by the righteous, tucked into cracks in the sidewalks, dropped in the grass, breathed into the air, left waiting for others to find. You who are upright in heart, let your deeds declare your love. Let your hands be a source of healing. Let your joy be a fountain of blessing. Rejoice in righteousness and spread holiness throughout your days. Light is sown for you. Seek it, find it, magnify it in service to God's holy name. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Rabbi Jessica just wanted me to remind everybody that there's no more Lunch and Learn until January, and to have and to thank you very, very much, our incredible teacher, and to enjoy a happy Hanukkah. Maybe we'll see you for candle lighting at Uptown Boca tonight. Not from Israel, but in Uptown. But next time you come, and also on Friday night here at the Schaefer Family Campus.
Thank
So,
you.
Chag Sameach.
Chag
Shabbat
Sameach.
Shalom.
Back to the mail.
Bye.